Okay, so have you ever wondered if it's possible to, like, explore same-sex attraction, but without having to, like, come out publicly?
Yeah, it's a question that I think a lot of people have probably thought about at some point.
Yeah, for sure. And today we're going to look at a source, mnmeetmen.com, that directly answers this question with a very simple answer.
Yes. It's interesting because right off the bat, the source acknowledges that this is like a real dilemma for a lot of men.
Right.
They might be married, or maybe they're still figuring things out for themselves, or they just really value their privacy.
Uh-huh.
So the desire for same-sex connection doesn't always mean that you want everyone to know about it.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack in this deep dive. Like, how can men actually explore these experiences, but discreetly?
Yeah.
Thinking about staying safe, keeping things private, maintaining control. And we're going to be using the insights from menmeetmen.com for this.
Right.
And they talk about different situations, like, whether you're married in the closet or just curious. So there's a lot to cover here.
Yeah. And what I find really interesting is the mission that the source lays out.
Yeah.
It's all about understanding what's possible in terms of private connections,
Mhm. Right.
without having to deal with labels or any drama or unwanted exposure.
Yeah,
It's really about empowering you to explore your desires on your own terms.
absolutely. So let's get into it. So is it actually possible to stay private while you're, exploring this part of yourself? The source seems to think so.
Yeah, they're pretty confident about it, actually. They state very clearly that staying private is possible.
Okay.
But they also emphasize that it doesn't just happen automatically.
Right. It's not
You have
magic.
to set clear boundaries for yourself,
Yeah.
make smart choices about where and how you connect with people, and if you're going online, use the right platforms.
It makes sense you have to be deliberate about it.
Exactly.
And the source even says something really encouraging. They say that many men who have never come out still find ways to enjoy discreet connections without compromising their privacy.
And that's such a key point.
So
It normalizes the whole experience.
Right.
If you're listening and you've been wondering about this, it's telling you it can be done.
Yeah.
It's all about making intentional choices.
Okay, so let's say this is something you're considering. Like, where do you even start? The source really stresses the importance of self-reflection first,
Right.
like asking yourself some crucial questions right from the get-go.
It's like the foundation.
Yeah.
Before you even think about connecting with someone,
Mm.
you have to look inward. And the source gives you 3 key questions to really think about.
Okay, what are those questions?
The first one is, are you looking for one-off encounters, or do you want something more like a repeat connection?
Okay.
So thinking about this helps you figure out what kind of interaction you're really after and how much ongoing involvement you're comfortable with.
So are we talking like something casual or something more regular?
Exactly.
Right, right. Okay, what's the next thing to consider?
The second question is, do you want physical intimacy or conversation, or both? This is about understanding what needs you're actually trying to meet. Is it purely physical, or are you also looking for some connection and communication?
So it's like, is it just about the physical act itself, or do you want to be able to like chat and maybe even, form a bit of a bond?
Right.
Okay, and what's the last part of this self-reflection?
The last question is, do you want to avoid getting emotionally entangled?
Uh-huh.
And this is huge for protecting your privacy and your sense of control.
Yeah.
It's about being really honest with yourself about how much emotional investment you're comfortable with in these kinds of connections.
So it's really all about being upfront with yourself from the very beginning.
Totally.
Like the source says, this honesty, it's what guides your choices moving forward.
Yeah.
And it helps you avoid situations that could, jeopardize your privacy or mess with you emotionally down the line.
For sure. Knowing what you want, and just as importantly, what you don't want, is like your roadmap as you figure out how to connect with others discreetly.
Exactly. And that leads to the next question, like, okay, you've done the internal work.
Right.
Now, where do you actually go?
Right.
The source talks about a few specific places you might consider.
Yeah.
So let's start with gay saunas. What does the source say about those in terms of privacy?
Well, one thing that's really interesting is they highlight some key advantages of saunas when it comes to discretion. For one thing, you usually don't need profiles or usernames.
Okay.
You just go in and your presence doesn't create a digital trail like you would get with an app.
So that's a big plus for privacy.
Exactly.
No digital footprint.
No. And a lot of gay saunas offer some level of anonymous entry,
Okay.
which adds another layer of privacy. Here's a really important point the source makes. You don't actually have to engage in any sexual activity.
Oh, interesting.
You could just be there, observe the environment, and see how comfortable you feel without any pressure to participate.
So it's kind of like a low-stakes way to just check things out.
Exactly. It's like dipping your toes in the water.
Okay, that's cool. What's the next option they talk about for discrete connections?
They also mention swingers clubs,
Mm.
but specifically ones that have events that they describe as inclusive.
Inclusive. Okay.
And the key word there is inclusive, meaning that they're specifically catering to people who are bi-curious or exploring same-sex attraction.
Gotcha. So what makes these types of clubs discrete?
Well, the source emphasizes that there's a kind of inherent discretion in these settings. It's similar to saunas in a way.
Hmm.
There's not really a social expectation to explain why you're there or what you're looking for.
Okay.
People come for all sorts of reasons, and a certain level of privacy is just respected.
So it's like these physical spaces where the focus isn't exclusively on, a gay identity can actually offer a degree of anonymity.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about something that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds. Hookup apps. The source mentions these too, right?
They do.
Okay.
Hookup apps are definitely an option, but they stress the importance of being really careful, and specifically using apps that have strong privacy features.
So they're not saying to avoid them entirely, but you got to be smart about it.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you are thinking about using apps, what are like the must-have privacy features to look for?
Well, the source specifically recommends using apps that prioritize and support privacy.
Hmm.
They even mention Field and Atom for Atom as examples of platforms that have these kinds of options.
Okay.
And these features can include things like being able to blur or completely hide your face pictures in your profile.
Oh, that's smart. So you can still connect with people, but you're controlling how much of your identity is visible.
Exactly. What other privacy features should you look for?
Yeah, what else?
Another thing they recommend is disabling location sharing or using approximate distance settings.
Uh-huh.
So by turning off precise location tracking or just sharing a general area, you're preventing others from knowing exactly where you are.
You don't want to be broadcasting your exact location, that's for sure.
Right.
Okay, anything else about using these apps?
Yeah, they have one big warning: avoid apps that link directly to your Facebook or other personal contact information,
Right.
because that could accidentally expose your activities to a much wider network.
Yeah, you don't want that.
No.
So the takeaway with apps is if you're going to use them, choose ones that are built for privacy and be strategic about what info you share.
Definitely.
Okay, now let's move beyond specific platforms. The source also has some great advice about just general digital privacy.
Yeah, this is so important for anyone who wants to keep things discreet these days.
Yeah, your online activity can reveal a lot more than you think.
Oh, yeah. So the source gives you some practical steps to take to minimize that risk.
Okay, what are the essentials?
The first thing they recommend is using a secondary email address,
Mhm.
specifically for these kinds of interactions.
Okay.
This keeps your personal and work email totally separate from your exploration.
It's a simple way to compartmentalize things.
Exactly.
Else.
The second tip, and this is a big one, don't store any sensitive messages or images on your main device. Because if your phone or tablet gets compromised, that could lead to some unwanted exposure.
That's a risk you definitely don't want to take.
That-
So no risky stuff on your main devices.
Exactly. They also suggest using platforms that have features like disappearing messages or end-to-end encryption.
Right.
So this adds an extra layer of security and ensures that your conversations aren't just floating around forever. Encryption basically makes your messages unreadable to anyone except the sender and recipient.
Yeah, those self-destructing messages can be a lifesaver. What's the last digital privacy tip?
Never reuse a username that you use on other platforms or in other parts of your life.
Okay.
Keeping your online identity separate helps prevent someone from, putting the pieces together and figuring out who you are.
So the idea is to keep your digital world compartmentalized to reduce the risk of getting accidentally exposed.
Exactly.
All really solid advice. Now let's say you've connected with someone online and you're planning to meet in person. The source has some specific guidance on how to do that safely and discreetly.
Yeah, now it's about the real-world logistics.
Yeah, and they really stress safety and maintaining privacy during these in-person meetups.
Of course.
So first things first, location. Where should you choose to meet someone?
They strongly recommend picking neutral and safe locations. They specifically mention hotels or other private venues as good options.
Okay.
These places usually offer more anonymity and you have more control over your surroundings.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And on the flip side, they caution against meeting at local parks or near your workplace, or definitely not at your own home.
Okay.
because those places have a much higher risk of running into people you know.
You don't want your private life bumping into your everyday life.
Not at all.
What about arriving and leaving these meetups?
They're pretty clear on this point. You should always arrive and leave alone.
Okay.
This helps to avoid attracting attention and reinforces the idea of a private individual encounter.
What about how you present yourself, like what you wear? Any advice there?
Yeah, they suggest dressing neutrally, avoiding anything that stands out or gives away personal
So
details.
keep it low-key.
Exactly. The goal is to blend in.
And perhaps most importantly, the source has a really empowering statement about, not feeling pressured to explain yourself to the person you're meeting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They say you never need to explain yourself to anyone. If someone demands answers, they're not the right person to meet.
That's a really good point.
Yes.
You're in control of your own privacy and you don't owe anyone an explanation.
Exactly. You set the boundaries.
Even in encounters that are meant to be casual, sometimes emotions can come up.
Mm-hmm.
The source touches on how to manage that too, especially when privacy is a priority.
Yeah, because even if the initial goal is purely physical, human connection can be unpredictable.
For sure.
So they offer some advice on how to protect your peace of mind in these situations.
So how do you navigate the emotional side of things while still keeping your privacy?
One key thing they emphasize is being really clear about your boundaries from the start.
Okay.
This helps set expectations and prevents misunderstandings later on.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And they also advise against oversharing personal details.
Right. The less someone knows, the more private things stay.
Exactly.
What other advice do they have?
They suggest focusing mainly on the physical connection if you're trying to avoid emotional entanglement.
Okay.
It's not that emotional connections are bad, but if your priority is discretion and avoiding complicated feelings, keeping the focus on the physical can be helpful.
Makes sense.
And lastly, they acknowledge that not everyone's going to understand your situation, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that your choices are yours, and you don't need anyone else's approval.
That's a good point. So to sum it all up, what's the main takeaway for our listeners who might be exploring this topic?
The source is very direct. They say you absolutely can hook up without coming out. Thousands of men do every day.
Okay.
And they stress that the key is setting clear boundaries, choosing platforms that are built for discretion, and only doing what feels right for you.
And they end with a really powerful statement. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You're allowed to explore without a label or a coming out story.
It's about having agency and the right to explore your desires and your identity on your own terms.
I love that. And thinking about the further reading, they mention specifically gay sauna versus hookup apps. It makes you wonder, what are the specific advantages and disadvantages of each of those environments when it comes to privacy and control?
That's a good question.
Yeah, something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.